Darlene, welcome back. This is
Thank
our
you.
third part in our conversations. We've talked about AI and we've talked about low code and workflows. And now we're getting to a subject that's near and dear to all our hearts, which is customer data. You've got a long history looking at customer data, having worked with some big consumer packaged good companies. And it is a we also talk about it being a great starting point for your AI journey. So today we're going to talk a bit about AI, its use in CDPs, talk a little bit about CDPs, talk a little bit about customer experience in general as well. It's a broad subject, so I don't know how much we can cover in 30 minutes, but I think we can hit some interesting topics. So, first of all, from your viewpoint, Darlene, and I have my definition because I'm in this business, but from your viewpoint, what is a customer data platform and what is its benefits and why is it needed?
Shortest answer is it's just all your customer data in one place, right? It's your golden, but they like to say your golden record, right? So I learned, although I was at Estee Lauder, I learned most about the importance of customer data and first party data at Reckitt, right? But the whole concept of like, okay, I'm collecting information about my customers, right? I'm either getting anonymous data and I'm having to figure out whether it's this person or not, right? I have identity resolution, or it's first party data where they're giving it to me, or third party data, I'm buying it and bringing it in, right? The thought that I can see my customer, where they've gone on the site, what they've bought, calls that they've made into customer service, what they're happy with, what they're not, on their reviews, right? If I can get from day one of getting them on board and every interaction related to them, I can literally really personalize each customer's experience, right? I can anything that they're doing on the site, I know, well, maybe I can predict and I can use AI to predict their next best action and give it to them. Here, we know you're going to want this. I can cross sell. So I look at customer data platform as it's really mostly data of your customer and it's fed in from both internal and external sources.
Yep. So, I mentioned to you a couple of stories I know, but let's start with one that's a large casino hospitality operation that also operates restaurants and different things as well. They're not necessarily in the casino. And one of the things they were, if you ate at one of their restaurants and then later were at the casino, they didn't even know you had been at the restaurant. So one of their issues was bringing that data together, and to accomplish that, they created a loyalty program, a loyalty card, whether you were at a slot machine, a roulette table, in a restaurant, in a retail store, online. That card was associated with you, and we could track that data. And then they talked about reducing. They didn't call them customers; they called them guests. The what they called friction, reduce guest friction was their creating things like a concierge, automated AI driven concierge. I gave you the example earlier of I don't want to call the front desk and ask for extra towels, but it'll be real easy to just get on the phone. I know it's, hey, Darlene, what can I do for you? AI asks that question. You say, give me some more towels. You're in room 327, right? Yes, I'm in 327. Boom. Somebody comes up and gives them to you. So these are the kind of personalization experiences that we're seeing. So it's not just, originally the concept of personalization was, oh, let me customize your UI on when you come to my website. But now we're literally talking about in-store visits, everything that's, my last other example is a high-speed rail train company that knew immediately when you walked into the station and knew from your past history that you like champagne and said, hey, I got a glass waiting for you up in the first class lounge.
I
You
mean, the
know,
whole idea, yeah, around like collecting customer data, like you have to be savvy about how you collect it without it being intrusive, right? We know when we're on a site and we move around, we're getting like tracked, but the whole goal is to be able to predict what you want before you do, right? So yeah, let's say I tend to go to the same hotels, I tend to fly on the same flight. They should be tracking everything I'm doing, from what drinks I order on the flight, the seats that I like to sit at. Why do I keep having to select it? I'm a window person. I'm a window right behind that wall. Like, why do I have to keep selecting it? You should just say, hey, we know you like the seat. It's available, right? So they should be able to start like tracking all of that. So like they could predict really what I would want, right? Because the more I don't have to tell you the same thing over and over again, the more happy I will be, right? So I think that's why, really working with a CDP to not just track like, hey, your name, your address, where you are, that your purchases, but like, what are the things that you do? Like, what are the questions you ask when you reach out to customer service? Right? What are the standard questions? Be able then track telemetry of where you are on the site, where do you tend to go to the most, right? And then you can start doing correlations along other customers, right? Who's very similar to you, and you create these identity graphs, right, of your different types of customers. So even if you don't know a lot about, let's say, another customer, you have some information of what they're like in comparison to others, right? But yeah, the whole goal of being able to predict what you want before you want it, to me, is the holy grail, right, of marketing and sales and you know companies.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about this. These are different aspects of AI and how it can be used in CDP. And they're very different. So we've got generative AI, and I gave the example of a concierge. So we have that ability. We have the ability to also optimize the performance of marketing people, make their jobs simpler. And then last, we probably want to talk about is I've over and over have seen the importance of a foundational data layer for being able to support a CDP, to support AI initiatives. I think we should talk about all three. Let's start with enabling workers. I gave the example. I had a top CMO from a large consumer packaged good company describe some of the very talented young women that work and young men that work in the marketing department. Enthusiastic, full of energy. She referenced a Netflix show, Emily in Paris. It's a room full of Emily in Paris. Fashionable. And, how do you see generative AI being able to enable them to do more without having to necessarily impact data specialists in IT?
So if you have people in marketing, right, what are their ultimate goals? Marketing's known for creating a lot of stuff, content, right? Right there, easy. I've heard of marketing departments using video creation tools and just accelerating campaigns, right? Or simply asking, hey, I don't know how do I fix my Outlook? It's not opening, right? So, it's enabling people to ask a question and get a response or create something. And so if you look at Marcom, some of the best use cases are really around creating personalized content at scale, right? Building your persona profiles, right? Imagine you're a B2B company and you're going to talk to a prospective client, right? Or one of your clients that you have, and you need to figure out what they're going to care about, right? You can search the internet for what their company is doing. What are they in the news for? What have they called? What is their firm called in? Where do you think their hot topics will be, right? You can start to aggregate that information and say, hey, give me a summary of this client based on external and internal factors that I should be going in to talk to them about. That was one of the use cases that we saw, because it's like, that's very manual intensive. So it's really giving people the ability to like pull information together in a really scalable way. Sometimes just ask the questions.
Hmm. That makes sense. I had an experience recently where I bought a product. I was so impressed with the AI driven process they had used. I had visited a website, just curious about something, and suddenly I got an on point message. And it wasn't the typical, oh, I see you're searching for tennis shoes, and now I got a bunch of Nike ads. It was dead on point of what my problem was, and simultaneous to a LinkedIn connection request, an email, and a phone call. And what was important, all of it exactly on point. So the salesman's on. I do take the call because it's a problem I'm trying to solve right then and there. And I asked the guy, I said, that was amazing. I looked at your website an hour ago, and you guys are not only calling me, but you've guessed why I was looking. And he said, we've got an AI app that basically combed the internet. I guess they got third-party data of other things I had looked at. They had looked at industry specific things, and somehow they had come across the exact problem I was trying to solve. Because this product can solve a lot of different things, and well, I had to buy it. I was totally impressed with the speed of it and the accuracy of it. So maybe that's an extreme example, but it was impressive.
But it's what companies, a lot of companies do now, right? They pull in third party data, don't really know it, but they do identity resolution. We think this is you, right? But imagine now, like before you type into a search on the site and say movies about dogs, let's say on Netflix, right? Okay, I can assume you like movies with dogs, but maybe I like happy movies, sad movies, scary. Maybe I like Cujo, not necessarily Old Yeller, right? So I have a chat bot now. I can ask questions of saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a movie about, like Stephen King." Like, so now they can get more about me simply because I have the ability to prompt. And then to mirror that with what you already know about me, where I go. Yeah, they're just going to get so sophisticated, and why it's like, yeah, hyper personalization is coming because you're now going to be in a number of agents chatting across the board, and so much can be gleaned from how you write something versus just a search query, right?
So let's jump over to data for a second. I mentioned a casino operation, another operation very similar. We're headquartered down in Miami, got all the big cruise lines down there. Some of the problems those guys face is, once again, got reservation systems, basically hospitality systems, dining, stores. Some of them operate casinos, casino information, onshore activity information, all sitting in separate databases. And then on top of it, multiple lines. Most of these cruise lines own some high-end lines. And pulling that data together to create a CDP in the first place, I mean, first of all, and you had mentioned earlier the problem of, I want to do an AI project, but I haven't considered my data foundation in the first place. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of data, both from an AI and from a CDP point of view, and the challenges that people are facing?
It's so funny because, like, for anybody that has had to live through the ChatGPT era of like innovation AI, it's all like move, 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 fast, fast. This everything is AI. Everything should be able to solve with AI. But the problem is AI has been around forever. And I used to struggle with all sorts of leaders going, yeah, there's no value in it. It's too expensive. We'd have to pull all the data together. And it was very challenging. Still is, right? Just because I have ChatGPT that can create cool imageries and sentences and structures and look doesn't mean my data all of a sudden isn't needed to be pulled together. It needs to be clean. It needs to be tagged. It needs to be, not in silos. I mean, you can have a fabric on a mesh on top of it and have different databases. You don't have to move everything together. But like, yeah, your CDP, you want your golden profile. This is what my client is. So all the original challenges with AI didn't go away with large language models. They just got highlighted as now, how do companies start? Because if they weren't ready before, they still aren't. So how do you prep? How do you go down the path of being what the future is going to look like with AI? And how do you start? Where do you begin? While you also need your data to get ready. So where right now, what data is good where you could use? And that's why I say low hanging fruit, some of your early use cases of like just generate content, personalized content, movies, your images, things like that, summarizing emails, but then focus on, well, what's your next data set that's worthwhile? And your customer data really should come together, right? Because the future will be very targeted, very personalized experiences, and those people that do it well win, right?
So that process of identifying data sets that you're going to utilize, the low hanging fruit, the next fruit a little higher up, on down, that's going to create a roadmap. That's to me seems to be a exercise that needs to be taken with rigor, right? I mean, you really have to juxtapose what is it that is important to the company from a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Operational Officer, and then, you've got to understand the level of effort, kind of again use the word juxtaposed against return for that effort and create a roadmap. And so there's an exercise which is really a logical exercise that I mean I would think that that's an investment
Yeah,
that is worth it. That is
it
something that
is.
people need to stop and do if they really
Yeah.
want to be successful. And okay, it's slowing down my deployment a little bit today to rapidly speed it up later would be what my
Yeah.
answer would be. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
The future of what people's expectation are when they get onto a site is you know a lot about me because I want to be able to chat it in versus click on links to figure it out. Right now you can kind of get away with not having a ton of personalization and people don't know because they're used to just maneuvering around the site themselves. The future is you probably don't have a site they're maneuvering around. They're asking you a question and you're surfacing what their answer is, and you should be tracking that. So I do think you need any company who has not thought of a CDP. It doesn't have to be a bot one. I believe with low code, like you could create your own, right? Golden copy, golden record of your client. Decide what data is available now that you could use. How do you bring it in? I mean, I've worked with companies where like their customer ID isn't the same with all their systems. So it's like, okay, well, let's start with what we do know, where we can match customer information, right? And start putting a plan on what's my maturity look like over the next 3 years, you know what I mean? Like, where do I start and how do I get there? And start looking at your data and prioritizing it based on, what's most valuable and most ready, right? It's the same matrix of innovation, right? Like, what is low hanging fruit of the data I know that will give me the most value? And everything else you kind of figure out along the way as a roadmap and put it together. Like, I don't need to right away know all of my customer support ticket information, but I certainly want to know all the purchases that they've made, right? I could cross sell, right? That's valuable. So do I merge that data together? Start thinking through where you store information about your customer and start figuring out the path of implementation based on just what's easy and what's doable, and then put a plan together.
So the composable CDP, I'm going to create a bespoke CDP. There are some challenges to that. I agree with you, and I think it is a place for people, but there's some relatively easy challenges, like how am I interfacing with my experience platforms and those things. But now you start talking about you certainly want to have your privacy regulations, GDPR or whatever, where the big vendors have figured that out.
Right? Or let's say you need to do the removal of the data based on GDPR, like someone complains. Like, is that something where it's like, yeah, they have access to the data to be able to do that for you? So I think it comes down to really looking at what traditional CDPs have, whether it makes sense you could do a bespoke. Where is it that they have the competitive advantage that you don't want to have to do identity resolution, right? They've got a good model, right? So I think you just need to kind of look at what is it from a buy, what is it from a build, and if you do build, what can you bring in from those vendors, if at all possible, right? To do some of those, or how does that work? And it could be, yeah, you're going with a vendor tool to do it. So it comes back down to our SaaS conversation, right? What is it that they're doing really, really unique besides workflow and data storage and data collection, right? And I do think there are a few things that they've done which they've got already integrations to third-party vendors, right? Those
But
kind of
you can
things.
you can do some of those third party vendors yourself, but you have to know you need to do them. So
Exactly.
so things like device fingerprinting. Well, there's services that you can hook up to do device fingerprinting. There's identity resolution type products that are standalone. Of course, they're vendors you're paying, but maybe it's a workflow that's easier to do that, or a function that's easier to do that way. And when you and I first met too, I think one thing people overlook is what I call the front door. And that's switching from an identity access management tool and, oh, it's security. Well, hang on. There's a new class of products called customer identity access management. And some of that can deal with GDPR issues, so that they built that at that level as you're coming in. I call it coming in through the front door, and built the third party connections to things like the device fingerprinting. I don't recognize this as Darlene, but I recognize this device. And so I'm going to create an anonymous token for that person until we do identify it, and then feed that up to the CDP. So how does AI, you know, let's talk about the generative AI or AI in general and some of the risks that may be involved. The hallucinations, governance, that type of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when it comes to hallucinations, I always put AI in two different spectrums. There's generative AI. So it's a model that's trained on a whole lot of content, could be words, could be videos, could be images, and it generates new content from that. And then there's your deterministic AI, which is it's trained on a smaller subset of data, most likely. It's trained for a specific response. That response typically is a 98% chance that your client is going to churn based on this information, right? Generative AI, it's predicting, let's say, the next word in a sentence talking about your churning clients, right? Both of them are predictive. So both of them are going to be 100% chance of an inaccuracy at some point, right? Because it's a probability, right? Generative AI, it doesn't know the questions that you're asking. It doesn't have the knowledge or the reasoning to understand the question. It's basically saying, based on the context of the words put in front of me in the prompt, what's the kind of response I would have expected from the history of responses. And it's just basically, and the more I give context, the better the answer will be. But it's trained on publicly available data, right? So hallucinations are a huge risk that I know a lot of people will beat me up. They will never go away with a large language model or an image model. Like they're just never going to go away simply by the nature of they're not trained to know that answer and to respond to that answer. They're simply trained to create a sentence that based on what it's been learned on. And there was a great example. Was it you and the Celtics, right? That someone was doing, oh, I don't think it was you. Someone was telling me the story that they wanted to know who is the most likely person to leave this basketball team, right? Or be traded. And generative AI gave the answer, well, this person, right? This athlete. Well, he'd left last year. And I said, well, of course the generative AI is going to tell you most likely to leave because a majority of the content it knows about that basketball player, he's still on the team, right? Very little of that content has him leaving the team. So based on probability, he's likely on that team, right? And that's kind of how I tried to describe it, was that, okay, over the years that he's been playing basketball, like 10 years, 9 of them he's been on the team. 1 year he hasn't. Clearly it thinks he's still on the team, right? But it doesn't really know. So I look at hallucinations will always be there, which is why I look at when implementing, let's say, an agent, a chatbot, use a large language model for asking the question. If you have a high risk response, you need it to be fairly accurate, it's connected to another model or it's connected to an API. And that response back could be a large language model. So I look at large language models are going to be about 10% of your models that you use, right? You're going to use it for summarization, email summarization, generic things. But when you want, let's say, a response to an audit report, I want a model trained on past audit reports so it's responding very similarly, or a RAG's in there and it's being very specific. I don't want it to just kind of respond because it's a regulatory response. There are implications if your audit report has inaccuracies, right? So based on the risk, it will determine whether I'm like, yeah, a large language model will do, or do I want something that's smaller, more specifically trained. And there are a lot of small models that are cheaper to train and they're being trained on your data, right? They're going to come and they'll be there. I look at it going, do you need a Ferrari to deliver the pizza? No, right? So if I really just want something, will a smaller model do it? Because you're never going to get rid of hallucinations. The other thing is you don't know what that data is trained on, right? So you don't know if there's bias, right? You don't know how that model works. They're black boxes, right? So in some cases, you may want to, especially if you're in a regulated industry, be selective of the model that you use, right? One where it's like, yeah, you could probably recreate the response. But yeah, when it comes to AI, it is not a one size fits all with an LLM, and LLMs are not for everything, right? You need to be really take a risk approach in like how important is the response in being accurate. And does it require AI, or does it require an algorithm that actually has a 100% chance of being correct, right?
This is where that confusion between AI and ML can come into play sometimes, because an ML can be fairly accurate because really it's just an algorithm, right? So the question that I'm going to ask is, if you're talking about ML, well, I can see where the answer is. But when we start talking about data and the challenges of having your data ready for CDP or for AI, but for CDP in this conversation, does AI play a role in cleaning data? Can it play a role in cleaning data? Or is that really a machine learning function? Whether that's setting a governance policy, a retention policy, or cleaning duplicates. I mean, in your mind, is that an AI function or an ML function or a little bit of both?
I think it's both, because like if you think about it, AI is really the holistic umbrella on which machine learning sits, right? So I would want to train on my customer data where there are potential gaps, right? Where I have different things, right? So it's a combination of both, right? I've seen it used for identifying anomalies in customer data. Before you put it all together, it's like, okay, well, these customers seem to be not quite right, right? The data doesn't seem to be good, or it helped us generate metadata for it, right? Saying, okay, well, we need to know what each field is, and we need to take all the different databases, and all of these need to be kind of in sync, right? This is a client ID, this is a client ID, this is a client name, that's a client name. Way people name their databases, it's not consistent, and AI won't know necessarily it's the same thing unless you kind of give it those definitions, right? So you could use AI to do that in machine learning as well, right? Because you got to understand your data set.
Yep. Well, we're out of time, Darlene. So these have been great sessions. I really appreciate it. I look forward to doing some others with you down the road. So thanks a lot, Darlene. Thanks for your
Thank you. I
time.
appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thanks.